I'm doing something while I'm farming my monoliths, and if you're not a Last Epoch player already, then you might not know that this exists. So let's talk about it. When you are farming your monoliths, there's corruption. Hopefully, whenever you're farming something, you're already in empowered corruption, that's a different story. When you get to empowered corruption, your baseline corruption is 100. So all of your monoliths, you start at 100, even if you've never done them before, or if you haven't even unlocked them yet. So what we do is we can push up one monolith as high as possible. So all my monoliths are at 100 corruption right now, and this one's at 200 corruption. So I'm going to farm this corruption, or this monolith, until I get 200, 300, maybe even 400 corruption, because my build is pretty strong. And once I do that, if I jump and go to a different monolith instead that I haven't been farming yet, I'll be back at 100 corruption. But here's the important part. As soon as I do a Shade of Aerobus, like one of these guys right here, my Shade of Aerobus will say, it'll say Ketchup corruption, or like bonus corruption. So normally a Shade of Aerobus, if it's close to the center, it might be a negative number, but listen, pretend like I have a higher one over here. A Shade of Aerobus might be like plus 10 or plus 11 corruption, but it'll give you a Ketchup corruption as a percentage of whatever your highest corruption is on a different monolith. So if all of my monoliths are 100 corruption, and then this one's at 500, if I go to a different monolith and I do one Shade of Aerobus, it'll give me, 10-ish corruption. But the bonus corruption could be 100 or 150. Like, it's huge. Most of the time, my Ketchup corruption tends to be like 40 or 50. But going from 160 corruption, going from 100 corruption up to 160 just by killing the Shade once is awesome. So by doing this, we farm one monolith a whole bunch. I'm farming this because I wanted these set unique helmets and shields that drop from this place. So I'll be farming this. I'll get this like 300, 400 corruption. And then if I go somewhere else, I can push corruption super fast in that way. All right, if you made it this far, let me give you one more tip, okay? From the very beginning, when you get to empowered monoliths, all of your monoliths are at 100 corruption. The first thing that I do when I get to empowered monoliths is I try to fix my blessings, because my blessings are probably all over the place. They're only the unempowered version, which means they're lesser, they're not very strong. So the first thing that I do when I get to empowered monoliths is farm for the correct blessings and try to get good rolls on them. Here is how I use corruption while I'm doing that. If let's say that the first place that I go when I get to empowered monoliths is Reign of Dragons. There's a really good blessing here, and there's all res and there's crit avoid. Having one or the other in your build tends to be like 99% of my builds. So I'll go to Reign of Dragons. I got 100 corruption. I'll kill the boss once or twice while I'm trying to get the right blessing. And as I'm doing that, right before I leave, I'll do one Shade of Aerobus, because it'll take my corruption from 100 and it'll put it up to 115. Not big, but it's a little bit. So then I go to my second monolith and I try to fix the blessing over here. Now, if I do a Shade of Aerobus, I'll have that bonus Ketchup mechanic. So it'll be like, plus 15, plus 7 on top of that. So then this one goes to, instead of 115, it'll go to like 125 or so. And then once I get the right blessing here, I'll go to my next monolith, and then the Ketchup mechanic will kick in, and it'll be based off of 125, because now 125 is my highest. So that way, it's kind of like, do you remember back when you had the slingshot strategies in Path of Exile? Back when that was like region farming? Man, I forget all the terminology that goes with Path of Exile. But the point is, you kind of leapfrog just a little bit to get higher and higher corruption while you're jumping around. So the point is, before I leave a monolith, I do one more Shade of Aerobus to get that higher corruption so that my next monolith can kind of leapfrog on top of that. I use that initially, and then later on, I do the thing that I first talked about, where I get one very high, and then I go transition to something else. If you do those two things, or one of those things even, you're going to have a much better time getting to higher corruption numbers faster and feel like you can farm rare items, rare gear, rare boss drops more efficiently.